welcome. It's the Prospect Weekly Roundup. It's Friday. It's 12:30 Eastern. We are always here. You are always here. Thank you for being here. David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect, and very excited to have, for the first time on the Weekly Roundup, our relatively new staff writer, been here a couple months or so. It's Hassan Kanu. Hassan, how you doing?
Oh, David, happy and excited to be here for the first time myself. Yeah, looking forward to doing
Yeah,
this.
this is fantastic. So Hassan comes to us from Reuters, and before that, Bloomberg Law, and we're really excited to have him with us and get involved. Does a lot of work on legal issues and things like that. So we're going to have a legal heavy episode here today with maybe some more fun down the road as well. So I want to mention at the top that if you're watching on YouTube, there's a chat on one side of the screen. Please give us your questions, give us your comments, and we will take them up in the course of the show. So let's get started here. One thing that you've been writing for us about in the beginning of your tenure here has been these very historic set of trials of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. And the very first of these trials to actually go into session had an interesting week this week because you had Stormy Daniels testify in the case in Manhattan over hush money that was paid to her before the 2016 election. We've learned a lot about that scheme and about how it might have violated criminal laws in the state of New York. But you have focused on sort of another aspect of this, and that is the fact that Trump seems to be pushing the boundaries of the legal system and what the judge has said will be sanctions down the road if he continues with these activities. It's just talk about that aspect of this trial and what sort of it signifies in terms of accountability for powerful people, including in this case a former president.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's one of, I wrote about it because it was one of the things that was more striking to me about the trial. I mean, there's obviously, it's first on many levels, right? So it's striking in those respects. And probably, for me, two of the most salient, other folks have pointed this out too, things about the trial have been one, and I imagine this is similar to, for example, the Fani Willis trial in Georgia, right? Folks in that courtroom say similar things. That this looks like a television trial, right? There are all kinds of weird, abnormal procedural things happening that don't happen in the courtroom normally, and everyone knows that's because many of the parties are playing to an audience, right? That isn't just a judge, isn't just the jury or the people sitting there in the courtroom with them. It's the entire world, in a sense, right? And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, I think that's very noticeable when you pay attention to the step by steps of the proceedings and what's actually happening in court. The other aspect is how, again, outside of the first level of how unusual a defendant he is as a former president, right? The other level of how unusual a defendant he is how, you know, uh, you know, disrespectful, right? Disrespectful,
The
rude
legal
at
system
times.
itself, right? Yeah.
Right, disrespectful not just to the judge, but to the legal system itself. Yeah. It's not just that he sometimes disrespects or disobeys the judge's orders, the judge's demands. It's also that he breaks and bends. Let me take bends out of the picture. And he breaks routinely, right, the rules of the courts of the state of New York itself. Right, it's not just the judges in front of them who sanctions violate. And so that's one thing that stood out to me. Just at a basic level, there is no other
Let's get
defendant.
specific here, though.
Right.
Let's get specific. So the judge has said you can't use your platforms as a former president to call out the judge, members of the judge's family, or members of the jury, or the
Right.
defendants. You can't, and that this would taint the process in some way. And this obviously hasn't stopped Trump from using Truth Social and other ways to comment specifically on members of the jury and things like this. And prosecutors have asked for sanctions for that. And maybe give me the dollar figure that they asked for when they asked for those sanctions.
I think we're approaching 10,000 at this point, right?
Wow,
It's
got to be
definitely
on
reached
that.
9,000. Yeah, that's right. And so,
Absolutely got to be on that. That's got to hurt.
Yeah, really, really making them bleed there, right? Yeah, no, I mean, that's sort of part of what I was thinking through is again that difficulty the judge has to square with, right? I can't, I don't think anyone would deny that there are you cannot approach this case as just, I'm just going to apply the rules as they're written and that's it. And I don't care about who the defendant, you kind of have to care that he is the former president and the leading contender for one of our two parties, right? You cannot not care about that. But once you set that aside, or once you at least accept that, right, that this might not be a situation where I can throw this defendant in jail, right? Once you accept that, what are some sanctions you can level that would make a difference, right? The point is deterrence, and in some cases, punishment, right? It's making the party that continues to break a rule suffer some consequence that might deter them from doing that. And in this case, we have the judge leveling fines that are at a dollar amount that's really just completely negligible to a defendant like Trump, right? And so, as far as I understand it, there isn't a real.
And the judge has kind of said, he said, look, I can put you in jail. He said, this is well within my authority. If you keep violating the orders of this court, I can jail you. And I really mean it this time. Like I can jail you, I can jail you, I can jail you, I can jail you. So there is a reckoning point that has to come in at some point, right? That you can't just keep saying this is the punishment that you're going to get and then not deliver that punishment. It sort of makes a mockery of the court system.
I think so, and of the judge's authority, and that's one of the points I made in the piece. Is just that we are sort of, there are many points earlier in the trial where I and other folks pointed out that like, hey, look, we're clearly across the line at this point, right? The judge has a very solid, not solid, but very strong case and justification to level very severe sanctions, not to throw the former president, leading contender, in jail, but to level some very heavy, high dollar sanctions or start coming down with them much more rapidly, right? Stop being, he's giving Trump a ton of rope to when we're in the gray areas in cases where he could say that was a violation and add another $1,000,
And yet, do you think that in some sense Trump wants to go to jail? That he wants to have on display the deep state or whatever you want to call it, actually imprisoning him for what he feels are his beliefs or for his free speech, because that's the way that he presents it. Trump, on a couple occasions in the last few weeks, has literally compared himself to Nelson Mandela, right? And do you think he wants to go the whole way and actually be imprisoned? Do you think that he's trying to trigger this sort of backlash, this resentment at the system among his base?
I think there's two ways to answer that question, right? One, the easy way, the real answer, I would say, is no. No, of course Donald Trump does not want to go to jail, right? Do you really think Donald Trump, the guy,
the idea of it sounds better to him than the reality?
Right. I mean, do we really think the guy who uses reportedly uses a gold toilet wants to go to jail? I'll recall everybody's attention back to the mugshot of when he had to be processed, right? Which is one of the most real encounters he's had with the justice system that the rest of us are subject to. You're getting handcuffed. I mean, not in his case, right? He doesn't have to go through all that kind of stuff. But you're getting shepherded by some guard. His hands on your back. He's got a gun on his holster. Got some mace over here. He's got some backup with him. You're not in control. They're leading you. They're telling you do this, stand right there, look this way. He looked very angry in that picture, and I think he was angry. So I think the easy way to answer that question is no. Of course not. Donald Trump does not want to go to jail. I think the second way to look at the question, will it help him politically, right? Does he want to because he thinks it will help him politically? I think is more complicated and is unclear. I think lots of folks are assuming what he says, right? His
Right.
narrative. I'm going to come out looking like Nelson Mandela. We can dismiss that offhand, right? He's not going to come out looking like Nelson Mandela, but will he be like, will people view him as some sort of martyr in a sense? Okay, that's a serious question we can actually talk about. But I don't think there's a clear answer at all to that.
Well,
I don't.
it's very interesting because I think that Trump obviously has this belief that the only citizens that matter in America are in his base.
His
And
base, correct.
so his base almost certainly would take it the way that he takes it, which would be, I'm being persecuted. This is the system bringing me down. This is they're doing it to you by extension.
That's
But
right.
that doesn't depict the entire electorate, right? I mean, what really matters are the 6% of people in 6 swing states and how they would react to seeing a former president put in jail for insolence, for repeatedly violating the orders of the court. And there, I think it is trickier. I think Trump, by virtue of saying over and over, I am being persecuted for my free speech, he's trying to set the conditions for that to be the response from the broader electorate. But that doesn't mean that those conditions will necessarily be met.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think he's setting the conditions so that narrative can take hold. I agree with you that his base will absolutely. We've seen it happen over and over again. No matter how sort of ridiculous his premises are, that his base accepts it, right, and says, "Yep, that's the story." It happened the way Trump says it did. And so, yeah, I think I don't know that it will move the needle, and not in the way that Trump is suggesting it will, outside of his base, right? And I think it's a real question about, I think we should really give more thought to uh, um, whether it would be bad politically for him, right? Whether it would, whether outside of his base, right? I mean, imagine someone paying sort of casual attention to this trial, right? And maybe they hear the highlights. Oh my God, Stormy Daniels went back to her original narrative and suggested that she actually didn't really consent, right? That it was more so the situation, like, things like that pop out at people. But what if one day the headline they're hearing is that the judge just sent Trump to jail for some hours, a day, whatever
Right.
it is they hear. It's going to be an oh my God moment, right? Oh my God, the former president, the leading contender, just got sent to jail. And the
Right.
next question is what for, right? The next question is what for? And if people like us do our job, right, and if the media does a good job explaining what for, it's pretty hard to come away from that, thinking that it wasn't, as a legal matter, as a procedural matter,
Right.
justified. Maybe you might come
That's the
away thinking,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
point. And I mean, I think, and somebody asked in the chat, what kind of stories you're going to be covering, and I think this gets to the point is that what you're really looking at this issue is as a legal issue and as an issue for the legal system as a whole, because
right.
if they put exemptions on certain types of people in terms of the sanctions that the court is willing to impose, then we have a case of with
Frontier
liberty and
justice, right?
justice for some, right?
Mhm.
We have a case where who you are matters more than what you did, and that is a bigger problem for the court than even this one case.
I agree with that. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a great question. I'll touch on that a bit. And actually, in relation to this particular story we're talking about, I think there's the legal side that we just talked about, and one of the reasons why I wanted to come to the prospect and join you guys is because we focus on things like power and ideas and things like that, right? And so if you think about it through that lens too, I think they're very interesting issues, and this is something I hope to write about too. If you think about through the power lens in this case, right? Actual raw power, what it means, right? Not what laws say on paper, et cetera, et cetera. That's one thing. Actual power. I think one of the interesting issues in this case is this, and it's often there, right? It's this subtext, this like simmering threat of violence, right? That's behind when Trump attacks a person, right? Is we know, everyone understands that at the bottom of all this talk and all these concerns and all this other language that we use is the fear that someone that supports Trump is going to show up and do something to that person. We understand that's the bottom line of it. And here we have the president in court. He's,
And he
he's
doesn't
shooting that.
actually have, like, somebody doesn't actually have to do that for it to have its intended effect. As long
Right.
as it's sort of this vague kind of threat out there that in some ways does its own job. That the judge is thinking, Judge Merchan is thinking, okay, if I throw this guy in jail, what's going to happen to me? That the
Absolutely.
jury thinks that I mean, we had jurors jump off this case because they said, I can't perform this because I'm already, I've been outed and I'm getting questions from people and I'm worried about what this can do. So whether those threats are carried out or not, that there's still an effect, and it's an important effect, right?
I think absolutely, and we see that in each of his cases, right? I mean, and outside of his legal cases. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi's husband did actually get attacked, right? Was minutes from being, he was seriously hurt, was minutes from being hurt worse,
It only takes
right?
one,
So
and it only takes one of those instances to get everybody thinking.
that's right. That's right. I mean, I joked with our colleague Gabrielle a few days ago in the office, talking about the Fani Willis case again. I joked about sort of having that sort of moment of choosing a path in your life of like, here Trump did these things in my jurisdiction. I won this office. I've taken an oath to protect the people of Georgia. I've taken other oaths to uphold the law, et cetera, et cetera. And he, there's the evidence here to bring a case. But think that is a difficult question.
And
Do
it would
I
be
take
very
this
easy.
case?
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
very easy under prosecutorial discretion to say, you know what, I'm not taking this case. I'm moving on. I'm
right,
moving
right,
forward.
right.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean the tricky part is it's also easy under prosecutorial discretion to get to the conclusion of I have to take this case.
That's right.
But to your point, what is the question marks in your head is what happens when I take this case?
That's right.
I'm going to need 24-hour security.
That's
I
right.
can't go to dinner with my husband. I can't go to dinner with my wife. I can't go to my kid's basketball game. I can't go to my kid's baseball game, right? Or I can, but it's a whole, it's an even worse, more stressful situation than going to watch your
And
kid
that's
play on,
and that's
you know,
what living under authoritarianism feels like, right?
right. And
And
yeah, the fact that people, including the judge, have to think about these things
right.
before just doing their job, for following the law is part of Trump's point.
That's
And
right.
did you want to get a bit
Yeah,
to
let's move on. But that's great, and I expect and hope to see more stuff from you on that in the future. But another thing that both you and I have been writing about a lot is this kind of loophole in the legal system that is being exploited by corporate America. And the loophole is that if you want to challenge a rule, even though that rule comes out of Washington, comes out of a federal agency, and you want to get an injunction on that rule because that rule is going to affect your profits, it's going to force increased regulatory compliance costs, something like that, that you can go anywhere in the country, to any court in this country, to obtain that injunction. And there are different standards for how that injunction is going to be obtained in different parts of the country. And in particular, to get specific, if you file in the Fifth Circuit, in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Louisiana and Texas and maybe a couple other states in there, you're going to have a good chance of getting those laws blocked, at least temporarily. And particularly in Texas, because when you initially file, you file at the district court level. And in Texas, pretty much all of those judges at the district court level were handpicked by Republican senators who specifically were putting people in there for their ideological attributes. And there are parts of Texas where if you file in particular divisions of that federal district, you're going to get a choice of one judge or two judges.
A particular judge, right?
And all of those particular judges are right wing. They were either put in by Trump or put in by George W. Bush. They were handpicked by Ted Cruz or John Cornyn or the Republican senators who came before them. And so we have this structure where the Chamber of Commerce or any kind of business group knows all I have to do is file in Texas, and I'm probably going to get a fairly favorable result. So we've both written about this. Let's talk about the case that you wrote about, because it's really interesting, where the playbook was followed and they didn't get the result they wanted, but the Fifth Circuit even stepped in to try to force that result. So go ahead and talk about that.
That's right. That's right. Like you said, this is the Western District of Texas is the jurisdiction that a lot of these cases are being filed. Where to your point, you can basically narrow it down to one of two judges, both of whom are almost unfailingly favorable to conservative causes, right? And the case that I wrote about is another one of these cases brought by conservative groups, and it's about late fees, or the CFPB's efforts attempts to a rule to cap late fees that banks use.
So let's just unpack that for a minute. So the average credit card late fee is something like $41. So if you're late on your credit card payment, your minimum payment, you're going to get hit with a $41 charge. The CFPB, the reason that number is that number is that the Congress passed a thing called the Card Act in 2009. And in that, it said you can only charge fees related to the cost of collecting, the cost of providing that service. So in this case, a late fee is charged, and that's supposed to go towards how you collect the late fee, the late payment. And the Federal Reserve initially was the agency that implemented that rule. And they said, okay, we'll give you a safe harbor, credit card companies, as long as it's not over $30. And then it was indexed to inflation. It became $40. CFPB now has jurisdiction, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau now has jurisdiction over the Card Act. And they took another look at it and said, actually, it doesn't cost you $41 at all to collect a late fee. Turns out it costs you like $8 to collect money on a late fee. And we did a very rigorous study of this. And so they put a rule out that said, actually, the cap is going to be $8, because the Card Act says to us, it's a price regulation. It says you can't charge above cost. And so we're going to pull that back to the actual cost, which is $8. So, of course, credit card companies hate this, right? And take it from there.
They hate that eminently reasonable sort of regulation, right? I mean, we've all dealt with these late fees, overdraft fees, insufficient fund fees, right? And probably feel similarly about them all. But yeah, so I mean, this is that was the case. Some business groups filed a lawsuit in Texas in the Fifth Circuit, like you said, and sometimes when I talk about certain legal areas or bodies of law, I point out to people that like criminal law in many ways is somewhat intuitive, right? In other words, if I explain to you a set of facts and then I ask you, David, how do you think a forum whose job it is to settle disputes in a society should look at this? What you come up with as a fair way to judge that situation is probably pretty close to the actual rule, right? Then there are other areas of court that's not intuitive at all, right? You can guess all you want to, but the rule is, there's no real there's no leads from this and must follow from that. No, the rule is what it is for some other reason. And forum and jurisdiction are one of those intuitive areas, right? If I ask a person who's never spent a day in law school, what do you think should give me the right to file a lawsuit here as opposed to in Texas or Florida, et cetera? What they guess is probably right? If the thing happened here, would probably be one guess, right? Well, yeah, that's a rule of forum and jurisdiction. If the underlying events and dispute, et cetera, the acts that led to dispute happen in that place,
Texas, then it's okay to file in Texas.
Exactly. If someone is located in a certain place, et cetera, et cetera.
Why does this particular case sort of violate that?
Because there is no connection whatsoever to the Western District of Texas, right? In this place, all the agencies that passed this law are here downtown in DC, right? All the business groups, the Chamber of Commerce that are and other groups that are filing the lawsuit are primarily located here. The actual individual lawyers are in DC, so they don't have.
That's an amazing part of this. It was like 80% of the lawyers actually live in DC, but they were adjudicating this case in Texas. And none of the credit card companies are based in Texas.
Are based in Texas,
right. Those are the companies that would be affected by this rule. If you're talking about standing to sue, you have to have an injury. And none of the companies injured by this are based in Texas. So the judge, who was a Trump-appointed judge, he was the judge, I believe it was in Fort Worth. He gets this case and he says, what is this case? This has nothing to do with Texas. This is not based in Texas. None of the lawyers are from Texas. The rule wasn't made in Texas. The injury wasn't happening in Texas. Get this out of my courtroom. I don't want this. And so what did he do? He actually sent the case to DC, right?
Right. He sends the case where it much more obviously and clearly rightfully belongs in DC. And the business groups then filed a motion in the Fifth Circuit to basically to wrangle that case back. Right?
They appealed his ruling of moving the venue.
Right. And they appealed the judge's ruling on venue, yeah.
And what did the Fifth Circuit say?
And the Fifth Circuit backed them up, right? The Fifth Circuit essentially wrote a ruling that said that, I mean, there was a dissent, right? There was a dissent from one of the judges on the court who said that, look, we have no basis to do this, right? The reasoning of the district court below was completely sound. Right. The incidents happened there. The agencies are headquartered there. All the lawyers work there. On the other side of the scale, we have one branch of the Chamber of Commerce that happens to be located in Texas that the chamber, probably made a phone call to and said, "Hey, can you join our lawsuit?" And they signed onto a form. But either way, the rule is, like I said, that's why I said on balance, on the scale. If you only have on one side, well, one of these organizations is headquartered in Texas, and on the other side you have all the rest, like whatever the number is, 5 or more, are all in DC. All the lawyers are in DC. The rule was passed in DC. Then the way you balance that is you send the case to DC. So one dissenting judge said that, but a majority of the Fifth Circuit did support the business groups and say you should send this back. What essentially happened was the DC Circuit, in my view, wanted to avoid what is an unprecedented sort of situation where you literally have two courts fighting and saying, this is my case, this is my case, this is my case, this is my case.
They had already gotten the case and they had started down the road of working this trial or working this case. And the DC judge didn't really, I mean, it would have created some sort of constitutional crisis, right? If the DC judge says, no, Fifth Circuit, I'm not giving this back. I was given this and I'm going to see it through. That would have created some significant tension. But instead, what the DC Circuit judge says, okay, fine, here, take it. I'll dismiss this case in DC, and now the Texas judge can take it up again. And that's exactly what happened. And this yeah, no, go ahead.
I want to mention we are essentially, it's at this point it seems unavoidable, right? Once you get the right judge who feels the right way about the case that day, this one, because it's already happened, right? The Fifth Circuit has already had a defendant file a motion saying this case has no business being in here. We think it should be sent over here. And then, the other court accepts the case. Fifth Circuit tries to get it back. Another court has already told the Fifth Circuit, no, it's my case now, right? Mm-hmm. You guys are done. It's on my docket. And so I can adjudicate it. And the way the federal rules operate, you would be in violation if you reopen your docket and try, so they had to just back off of that situation. So this judge in DC, I think, decided not to do that for a second time, because to your point, the more and more this starts happening, things will reach ahead, right?
And it is happening more. I mean, there was another case very similar. It involves SpaceX. And their claim that the National Labor Relations Board is unconstitutional, which is an insane claim, but they filed in Texas. Texas judge said this is not really germane to my court, and I'm going to send it to DC. And the Fifth Circuit said, no, you're not allowed to do that. This was filed in Texas, and you have to handle it. So we're seeing this over and over now. And the other part of this that we can bring in is that the Judicial Conference, which is sort of this oversight body of the various district courts, made well, initially it was sort of a rule. They said, look, we agree that this judge shopping that goes on is problematic. And here's a small way that we're going to try to deal with it. And what we're saying is that if you file in a particular federal district, that the court can randomly assign cases to any division within that district. So this eliminates the situation where, for example, in Amarillo, Texas, in the Northern District, there's one judge. It's a guy named Kaczmarek. He's the guy that did the mifepristone ruling on abortion pills.
He's an anti-abortion activist before he was appointed.
Exactly. And if you file in Amarillo, you're getting that judge. Right? And what they're saying is the Judicial Conference is that, no, actually every judge in the Northern District of Texas should have a shot at getting that case, so that you can't automatically assume you're getting Kaczmarek. You might get somebody else. So they put this out. Republicans went ballistic. They said this is stepping on the rights and privileges of the various districts and the courts. And
by the way, that's sort of a new development, right? I'm unaware.
It's
of
very unprecedented that they would step in like this. Yes,
that they're opposing random assignment of judges. The idea that we're going to make things more fair by making things more random, right? That's a simple way to put it. And Republicans are basically saying, no, we don't need any more randomness.
Exactly.
We don't need any more fairness.
Exactly.
Is sort of ridiculous.
Exactly. And so the Judicial Conference essentially backed off. They said, oh, no, this wasn't a rule that we made. This was just some guidance.
Guidelines. Yeah.
Then the Northern District, which was really the one targeted by it. When we're talking about this judge shopping, we're talking about Texas. So Chuck Schumer sent a letter to the Northern District saying, look, I hope you would take the guidance and recommendation of the Judicial Conference and actually put it into practice. And the chief judge of the Northern District of Texas said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so this judge shopping thing continues. And so judge shopping is sort of this cemented into this reality. And now you have this sort of additional step of judge shopping, which is even if the judges, against their own interest, decide, no, I don't want to take this case, it will be enforced by the appeals court. And so it's like double judge shopping, right? Like not only do you have the business judge shopping, now the circuit court is actually judge shopping and saying, no, you will take the case, not this other person.
Right. We are basically at that stage where you could presumably potentially have a judge, we just had it happen, I guess. Judge saying, look, I don't think I should be hearing this. And his, I won't say bosses, that's way too simplistic, but judges that are senior to him.
Judges, the senior judges,
the senior judge
of them said, no, you have to do this.
We'll say, no, you actually do have to hear this case. Yeah. And so the Judicial Conference point is important here too, because in terms of guideline versus rule, right? There is no particular reason the Judicial Conference cannot pass a rule, right? They could pass a rule. It's just a matter of figuring out everybody's schedule and calling meetings and then doing the votes and whether or not you have the votes, right? That's the other important question, right? So at the end of the day, the heads of all the circuits in the country and Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, are the ones who are in charge, who head the Judicial Conference. They can get together and decide to put a stop to what's happening in the Fifth Circuit whenever they feel like it, as long as enough of them agree that it is wrong and should be stopped. Right? It's just a matter of voting on it. It's a matter of voting on having a meeting about this issue, and a matter of accepting one of the suggestions that have been put forth about how to fix it, and then voting on that. And then the judge that you mentioned in Northern District cannot write Chuck Schumer back and say, no, I'm not going to do it, because the direction will be coming from his superiors and he will have to follow it, right?
But unfortunately, the Judicial Conference has backed down, so they do have that opportunity. And then so the other recourse would be Congress, which does have a bill on judge shopping that would essentially implement the Judicial Conference's idea and codify it into law. So we'll see. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year, but in a potential Democratic trifecta down the road, maybe we'll see that happen. And I want to say that probably wouldn't do a whole lot in Texas, right? I mean, like all the judges are conservative in the Northern District of Texas. It's not like you're going to randomly get assigned to some wild-eyed liberal who happens to be serving as a judge in Texas.
Yeah,
there's a larger question there about the inability of Democratic presidents who appoint judges to get them appointed in Republican states because of blue slip laws and like these not even a law, that's custom, the custom of blue slips where essentially a senator can veto an appointee of a president in their home state. And this is a custom that has been done over the years. It's been routinely not followed when Republicans are in power, but has been followed routinely when Democrats are in power. And so you have this one-way ratchet of the courts where there are these areas that are very, very conservative that have only conservative justices, and you have these liberal areas that don't only have conservative justices because those blue slip procedures aren't followed in those places. So it's interesting. I want to get to some other things. I want to quickly run.
We have
Yeah,
we have we have a question here about the someone's asking a question we can handle pretty quickly about the CFPB case that was filed. Isn't it true that these financial institutions make most of their profit from fees? They make a tremendous amount of their profits from fees. I can certainly tell you about working on fee stuff and lately that airlines are some years back were making almost the lion's share of their profits from extra fees and things like that. So yes, it's a huge revenue stream.
Yeah, it's a huge revenue generator, particularly in the CFPB case. CFPB has estimated that if they reduce these credit card late fees from $41 to $8, that it would save the American people $10 billion a year. So that could give you a sense of exactly how much money they're making from these fees. So thank you for that. I'm going to go on to one other thing, and then maybe my favorite part of the show will come after that. We are talking to you from Maryland. You are a Marylander, and there is an election in Maryland happening on Tuesday. There are a couple races that we have been writing about and that we have been charting in Maryland. And we'll start with sort of the top line one, which is the Senate race. So Ben Cardin is retiring. And so that's an open seat for the U.S. Senate in Maryland. And it was kind of thrown into disarray. This is a very obviously Democratic state. But Larry Hogan, who's the two-term Republican governor, is running for U.S. Senate as a Republican in Maryland. And that raises the stakes on the Democratic primary in that state, which has two people who are contesting one another. One is David Trone, who's the sitting congressman from one of the districts there in Maryland. He's a rich guy. He's the CEO of Total Wine, which is, you might know, this kind of superstore for liquor and spirits and beer and wine. And he has put $57 million of his own money into this primary to try to buy this primary. And his opponent is Angela Alsobrooks, who is the chief executive of Prince George's County, which is one of the largest, maybe the largest county in this, maybe not the largest, maybe it's one of the largest counties in the state of Maryland. But she's a local official. She doesn't have statewide, or didn't at least before this primary, have statewide name recognition. Certainly didn't have a war chest of $57 million that she could throw on this race. So there was a disadvantage there. However, the last poll that I saw shows this to be a neck and neck race, and that is not what it was initially. So as someone who lives in Maryland and has sort of seen the dynamic here, what can you tell us about this particular race?
Sure, sure. Actually, I should point out I live in the city now. That's what
Oh,
we
you do live
locals
in the city.
say.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
we
were you're
locals
from
say.
Maryland originally, though, right?
I'm from Maryland. Yeah, yeah. I grew up in Maryland since about 9 or 10 years old, and moved back to this area, to Maryland actually, after law school, and ended up in the city just because that's where most of our jobs are, right?
Yeah, you got it.
But yeah, actually, some of them there are actually some many people from the counties you mentioned, Prince George's, Montgomery County, which are both counties that border DC. And I'm one of them. Obviously it's a personal bias, right? You're from a place, so you think certain things about those places. So a lot of us tend to think that these two places are special for different reasons, right? But they are important. They're important in the context of what you're talking about. Prince George's County is famous for being perhaps, not perhaps, it's famous, it was, I say perhaps because I haven't seen the stat come out in the past year or two or so. But for most of my lifetime, Prince, and I believe still is, Prince George's has been the wealthiest majority Black county in America.
Yes.
Right. So in other words, there's a large middle class in Prince George's County, and it's mostly Black. Right.
Yeah.
I'll put it another way. There's a ton of Black people in Prince George's County, and they're not necessarily like poor and the stereotype of how you think of most Black Americans, Black voters. On the flip side of that is also Prince George's, the counties and the areas that we call the DMV, the counties that border DC, include also Montgomery County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the country, period, right? Just period, regardless. I actually grew up mostly in Montgomery County, a little bit in PG. So those are the sort of dynamics that are underneath this, right? She's from a county and represents a county that has that identity as far as Marylanders, right? All Marylanders are aware of what PG is, the way I just described it, right? And those are the people, right? It's politicians, it's other politicians, not just the fact that David Trone said she's got some small endorsements in reference to
Well,
national
yeah,
politics.
Trone has been putting his foot in his mouth this entire race.
Right.
There was this comment that his
Sorry, I thought you mentioned this comment. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I'm just going to say the low level one. I'm not going to touch the other one, but they were low level endorsers. Now, these people are actually his colleagues. Also, Brooks has gotten, I believe, a majority of the endorsements from the Maryland delegation in the House, including the senator, the other senator, Chris Van Hollen, Steny Hoyer, who was the dean of the delegation, Jamie Raskin, who's a very popular figure who actually beat Trone to get his seat. Trone then moved to a different district to win his. And so calling them low-level endorsements when they're literally his colleagues who he works with on a daily basis, that didn't endear himself to the rest of the folks in Maryland politics, and probably inspired them to work even harder to knock this guy out. I should say that Trone represents a portion of Montgomery County, in addition to other counties across the district. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's exactly why I bring that up, right? David Trone represents one of the wealthiest counties in America. In general, it's also a very, very diverse county, one of the most diverse counties in America as well, right? And Angela also Brooks represents the most well-off majority Black county, right? So there's these dynamics underneath, and that's why I mentioned at the outset is, you think through what the hell was David Trone talking about? What did he mean by low-level endorsements, right? When all the top-level people from his state, a majority of the top-level people from his state, seem to be leaning toward his competitor. What does he mean by low-level endorsements? I think an argument could be made. I would imagine lots of Black Marylanders probably feel that way, right? That like what you're really referring to is her identity as a Prince George's County person. Because that everybody from the state, when they think about PG, thinks about Black folks, right? And when they think that she has a lot of local support, a lot of local endorsements, they're going to think from other politicians just like her, right? That's what they're going to think. And that's sort of more. That's a bigger part of her identity and what she represents to people in Maryland than it is than her national endorsements, right? There are a lot of people in Maryland who might be supporting her who care more, who might care more that she has endorsements from the other politicians in PG County than from some guy in Congress, for example. And so I think there's some question there about what exactly he meant about low level.
I would just say that in these races, it seems like when you have these rich guys who spend all kinds of money. We had this I'm in Los Angeles, and Rick Caruso, who's like a mall builder, he built the big mall in Glendale. He ran for mayor in 2022 against Karen Bass, and he must have spent $80 million running for mayor in the city of Los Angeles. And there just seems to be a diminishing set of returns. When you start seeing this guy every commercial break, when you start getting every mailer every other day is from this guy, there's almost like a curve there. This is my political laugher curve. So, yeah, it's good to have certain saturation, but then when it goes overboard, you're just like, I've had it with this guy. This guy's trying to sell me something, and I don't know if I'm buying it. There are several examples. Caruso lost that seat. And there are several other examples of very rich people who spend tons of their own money in these political races and end up losing. And Trone was up by double digits easy when he was the only one on television, the only one known. And now the latest poll that I saw is that it's a tied race. And so I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what ends up happening there. We also have a piece I'll briefly describe. It's on the website, and then I want to get to our last segment. The race in the 3rd district of Maryland is a really interesting one. This is John Sarbanes is retiring, longtime congressman, and there are 13 Democrats who are trying to replace him. One of them is Harry Dunn, who was a Capitol Police officer who wrote this best-selling book, and he's raised the most money easily. And then his main challenger is this woman named Sarah Kelly Elfreth, and she's raised about a quarter of the funds that Dunn has raised for this race. However, she's getting a massive amount of support from AIPAC, and this is direct support from their PAC, United Democracy Project. And what Luke Goldstein was able to find this week, and it's on the site today if you go to prospect.org, is that she isn't only getting support with television ads, which is usually what a super PAC would do for you, is they'd run television ads on your behalf, or television ads that are knocking another candidate. They're actually running a ground game operation. Luke was able to find an ad that AIPAC's PAC, United Democracy Project, was putting out, asking people for $4,000 a month to volunteer for a Maryland campaign. They haven't endorsed anyone else in Maryland but this individual, so it's clearly for her campaign, to knock on doors and run field operations. And there's also a $50,000 expenditure on phone banking operations. So we have not seen this level, this intensity of support from AIPAC for any other candidate across the country so far. And it shows you the level to which they are interested in going to support their candidates and get certain type of people in Congress. Now, the funny thing here is that Harry Dunn and Sarah Elfreth have virtually no difference in policy as it regards to them. But what Harry Dunn is running on is getting dark money out of politics. And that probably worries AIPAC the most, is that if you put in something that would limit the impact of super PACs, then they can't run the campaigns that they're running all around the country. So it's almost like a bank shot that they're trying to knock out Dunn so that they are protected from the possibility of a crackdown on money in politics, so that they can keep running these campaigns to put pro-Israel types and knock out people that they perceive as negative towards their causes in Congress. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's a really good piece. I encourage you to take a look at it at prospect.org. Now, in our final segment, and maybe we should come up with a name for this, like teach me something. So I have seen floating around this whole thing around this beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And I want to say from the outset, I'm not just asking the black guy about this. Like, you brought this up. You're the one that asked me.
I did. I wanted to talk about this. I've been thinking about it all
He wanted to talk about it. Just be very clear. He wanted to talk about this. But
I was mad one of the white guys on my staff hadn't asked me about it. I was like, hey, come on. No, go ahead.
Explain this to me like I know nothing about this, because I do know nothing about this.
Sure. So you certainly know that there's a tradition of sort of competitiveness in rap.
I know the existence of diss tracks.
Right. Right. So this is basically Kendrick Lamar and Drake. Drake sort of represents the sort of, the topmost tier of pop rapper, right? He's probably the most successful of all time, right? In terms of popularity, listeners, album sales, money, right? He's probably the most successful rapper of all time from that perspective. Of course, hip hop has always had certain values, right, as an art form that tend to move away from all those metrics I just mentioned, right? That aren't necessarily about money, because it was invented in New York and poor neighborhoods by all Black people. It's always been, there's always been this value of you have to have some concern about the living, the lives that Black people are living in America in your music or in your life in one way or another. Right. Kendrick Lamar represents that to a degree. He's also a mainstream artist, right? It's not like he's independent. It's not like he's on some small label. He's on a major label. He's also a multimillionaire. He's also a chart-topping hit maker in his own respects. But they essentially got into a beef because of personal disagreements they had as being colleagues in the entertainment business, personal disagreements they had, but also because of Kendrick's feelings of what I just mentioned, feelings that like Drake is sort of a culture vulture, right? That he's someone who's Canadian, who is half white, was raised by the white side of his family, didn't have much of a connection to Black Americans. I'm African, by the way, right? So I can relate to Drake in that sense. So he was critiquing him from that perspective. And also, and the biggest part of this as well is also, it is true that unlike almost all of his peers, Drake has never expressed concern about issues of race in America or Canada, really, right? Not in any
hasn't been part of his musical project.
Not part of his musical catalog, not part of his personal life. It's just not there, right? And you don't see that really with hip hop artists. You just don't see that. I can talk about the artist whose work is almost like, the only artistic merit it has is it makes you, move your head up and down and tap your feet. There's nothing else to it. Even those guys, right? Where you can be like,
those guys have some sort of consciousness. Yeah.
Even those guys have some sort of consciousness somewhere in the music or somewhere in their personal lives where you can see, they care about these issues and they have something to say about it, right? Drake is on the other end. And so that was fundamentally, besides their personal little ways they ran into each other.
And it seems like Drake is like mad at everybody. Like he's always having a beef with somebody.
Drake is mad at everybody because almost everybody is mad at Drake. And so, so Kendrick has a line in one of the songs where he says, "I'm not just saying," I'm misquoting the first part of the line, but he basically says, "I'm not just saying this." He says, "I'm what the culture is feeling." Right? In other words, he assumes that what I think is the way probably a majority of hip hop fans and Black Americans think, and it seems like he's right. but that was the sentiment essentially. That's the reason why you're saying it seems like Drake's mad at everybody, is because the way Kendrick feels is a popular sentiment among mainstream rappers. A lot of them look at Drake and go, "That guy's not one of us. He's not like us. He's not of us."
And isn't there another side to this where he's stealing music, or he's and then there's some issues with dating and things like that I think are on the side of this, but it's like it's almost like, is this about it not being cool to like Drake because he presents himself in some sort of outside this mainstream of where hip hop is, or above it? Or is it that like Drake's kind of a bad guy, like he's stealing stuff and is he Trump or is he Biden? Is what I'm saying here.
There are already videos, including videos made by music professors, that compare Drake to Trump. right? In the sense that he's such a major figure in the scene, you cannot take him down, right? Any attempts to take him down just kind of burnish him further, right? They just kind of keep him where he's at. When you try to attack him, you just keep him exactly where he's at. Right. Having this ridiculous level of notoriety where everyone knows who he is, right? And that brings him money in one way or another, right? But in terms of what you're saying, there is a point in again in the songs where Kendrick does say quite literally, "You must be a horrible person." That's what you just said. He says, "You must be a horrible person if people around you feel this way and this way and this way and this way." But the point about the stealing music, there's a tad bit of unfairness to Drake in the sense that many people who are at the top of their genre do this, right? A new underground person starts to bubble and they realize that like, oh, wait, that's what the kids are into now. I need some of that juice right there. And they go and take it, right? They take some of that person's flavor and add it to their music, or they just take it, and they usually get away with it. We let them get away with it because, again, of the sort of Trump effect. You're so big, I mean, the little guy might be on YouTube making videos about Jay-Z stole my song, but like, video has 300 views and Jay-Z's song is number 2, right? So nobody cares. But the reason why, so there's a little bit of unfairness to Drake in that sense, but the reason why I'll allow it on a personal level, I'll allow it, is because the reason why people say that is because of that critique that he's not of the culture, right? In other words, I think people are probably fine with letting Jay get away from it because he is of the culture, because he does sometimes, even though he represents I mean, he's probably the avatar of like capitalist rap, right? And nowadays,
he's not a businessman; he's a businessman.
Thank you. Right. But even so, people give him a pass because he does seem to have some concern about the real lived lives of Black folks, right? The reason why people don't do that with Kendrick is because they're saying not only are you not concerned with how people in New Orleans are living and what their lives were like and what their lives were like post Katrina, you also have no problem going to meet with the new hottest artist from New Orleans and like taking his hottest songs and just put them on your album, and you'll never give that guy a shot, right? If you gave that guy a shot later on, that'd be great. But you just kind of take their stuff and use it for yourself, that's the critique there.
I'm going to close with one comment from Tisha Mavaram, who kind of produces this whole thing, our producer and our communications director, put a comment in that says, she thinks it's notable that for a long time, a big part of Drake's audience was women. And then there's this perception that he's become more misogynistic, so that core of his base isn't defending him in this particular fight. What do you think about that?
To the point that he doesn't have defenders these days. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I think, again, this has been, they put out so many songs and some of those songs were like 6 minutes plus. There isn't really a critique of Drake you can make that Kendrick hasn't already made himself, right?
Right.
But to that, so he says at one point, again, I'm not going to do a direct quote, but he basically says, I like the singing Drake who used to make songs about like pining after women and having his heart broken. I don't like the Drake who talks all this gangster stuff about getting people killed and I'm going to get you beat up and all that kind of thing, right? And all the misogyny and stuff. And I think, part of that was basically just, Drake had a big fan base, but he made it clear from when he entered the industry that he wanted to be the biggest rapper in rap, right? So
yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a long, rap from the very start has had a theme of misogyny, right? Misogyny is central to rap music. Let's just be honest about it. I grew up as a fan. I'm still a fan. I have to be honest about that. It's just a fact. And so he basically just latched onto those tropes because, in my view, he wanted to broaden his audience, right? He didn't want to have just women listen to him. He wanted to be the person who everyone listened to. So he incorporated the
trade-offs there, and there were, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think we scratched the surface and only scratched the surface. So maybe next time you come back on the show, we'll get into it again. Hassan, thank you so much for being here. Hassan Kanu, a staff writer at The Prospect. I'm David Dayen, executive editor. Come back next week at this same time, 12:30 Eastern, and we'll have another edition of the Roundup. And you'll be able to catch this one and all of our weekly roundups at prospect.org. We archive these sessions. We put them up onto the website. So thanks a lot for being here and have a great day.
Thanks, David. That was fun.